Okay, I'll give you one, and it'll have a couple with it. Stained ceiling tiles. I know that sounds, you see them everywhere. Cracked ceiling tiles, voids in your ceiling tiles. If it's unseated or whatever, it's avoiding your smoke barrier, because we use those suspended ceilings as our smoke barrier throughout our hospitals. Most of them do. As an example, we were touring a hospital in a NICU, a very busy NICU, and we came up to the soiled room. I took my manometer to check the soiled room, and the soiled room was more positive than a OR. I mean, it was extremely positive. I open the doors, I always do, to check everything, and I look up, and there is a ceiling tile in there that had lots and lots and lots and lots of growth. Don't know. We can't say what we think it is because we didn't test it, but I know what it was. You know what it was. So not only in the NICU did we have a positive room, but we had a contaminant in that room that was obvious, that was positive to the NICU core. A lot of times people don't put two and two together, but that made that a very high level finding immediately.
There's a major crisis facing healthcare facilities management. We have aging employees, aging buildings, and aging infrastructure. We've created the Healthcare Facilities Network, a content network designed specifically to help solve for these three pressing issues in healthcare facilities management. We bring on thought leaders and experts from across healthcare facilities management, all the way from the C-suite to the technician level, because at the end of the day, we're all invested in solving the aging issue. Thanks for tuning in. Look at our videos. You will find that as a theme across our content. This is the Healthcare Facilities Network. I'm your host, Peter Martin. I have two of my colleagues here today. We're going to be talking about Accreditation 360. We're going to be talking mock surveys and findings. We're going to be talking education. So a wide-ranging conversation with my colleagues all around compliance and Accreditation 360. So very timely with all that's coming up. We'll dive into that. But before we do that, I would like each of my colleagues to introduce themselves. Tom, why don't we start with you, please?
Hello, I'm Tom Grice. I'm Vice President of Regulatory and Facilities for CREF. I've got over 35 years of healthcare facility management experience. Been working in for-profit, not-for-profit, third-party. I have a master's degree in facilities management, and good to see you all.
Hi, I'm Ness. I'm Vice President of Planning, Design, and Construction for CREF in the East region. I'm actually based in Fort Lauderdale. I'm also a Vice President and on the board of the local AMFP chapter. It's a great organization. I'd encourage anybody that would like to join your local organization to do so.
Thank you, Steve. And we thought, it was timely to have this conversation with the changes coming up with Joint Commission, the Accreditation 360 program starting January 1st, 2026. Tom, before I kick it over to you to kind of ask for, in your opinion, the practical implications of that and what it means for facilities, just if people aren't familiar with it, I'd say there's a couple of resources. Number one, we on the Healthcare Facilities Network just released or have released an interview that we did with Jim Grana. Jim is field director at the Joint Commission, and our conversation, and you can find it here on our YouTube page, that conversation really is the nuts and bolts of what they're doing and the program. They're not changing the conditions of participation. According to Jim, they're not going to be changing that survey process. What you've done is what you'll do. The big, one of the big changes, obviously, and Tom can dive into this, is the new chapter that they're creating, a reduction in standards. The new chapter is the PE chapter. So they're going from, and briefly, and I want to go to the expert. So on the life safety side, they're going from 23 standards and 260 EPs. That's current. So life safety, 23 standards, 260 EPs. And this is right from the guys at the Joint Commission. On the EC side, there's 21 standards and 195 EPs. So that's significant. They're getting rid of those chapters, going into what they're calling the PE, the physical environment. Physical environment will have 12 standards and 67 EPs. So a significant reduction. goes into effect January 1st, 2026. I'm not the expert. Those are the facts. Tom, given all that, though, you're the expert. You're out in the field. You worked in hospitals. You've been through hundreds, if not thousands of surveys. What's the practical implication of this change?
So I think the practical implications is it's going to clear up a lot of disparity between CMS and the Joint Commission, right? So CMS does come in and they follow up Joint Commission, and many times the standards don't line up. So Joint Commission may not have cited something that would be a conditions of participation with CMS or vice versa, right? So it really kind of melds them together, and there's a bunch of crosswalks and so forth on the Joint Commission websites that you can kind of go and look to see what the standard was, what it is now. We do process maps, and we had done process maps for environment and care and life safety for everything that had a documentation standard. So now we're process mapping the new standards. There's a few that don't fit, but that's because they kind of just went over to another chapter. But the survey process, as you said, is not changing. What the hospitals are required to do now, they're still required to do moving forward. It also does separate out if there's something that the Joint Commission is requiring. Joint Commission is requiring.
Get rid of the hard, right?
Joint Commission is requiring that's above the conditions of participation, and those kind of surface now. You kind of see where they are. I think that's really it, but it's a big change, right? Because we've been used to all the EC chapter, the LS chapters, all the EPs. We set up all of our documentation as it relates to that. We set up our policies as it relates to that, our management plans. So, really in preparation for January 1, which it's going to be a learning curve for both Joint Commission and the hospitals. I think just to take a proactive approach and start looking at your policies to make sure that they're not referenced in an environment of care or a life safety. Take a look at your management plans, and start setting up your documentation books based on the new standards. And again, like I said, there's crosswalks out there. We also have our crosswalks and so forth. So if you do it before January 1, then you're ready for the new year, right? So, and I don't know that any of the vendors yet we've been kind of monitoring have there's some vendors out there that do provide binders, right, for your documentation. I don't think that they've started printing those yet. So, I would just start thinking about, how do we manage our documentation, because that's really the biggest change, than anything. So that's kind of, and really there's a lot of resources on the Joint Commission website, and we're also available for any type of consultation that you may have as well.
Right. One of the things, Tom, that I've heard, and I don't know if you have, while you're out there in the field, is some folks are a little fearful that, we had all those standards, we had all those EPs, and the guardrails were there, right? I've talked to some folks who are a little worried now that we've reduced the standards, we've reduced the EPs, now we have this one PE that they're calling. They're worried that there's going to be more findings over time because some of those guardrails have disappeared. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily see that. And I'll give you an example. Is the DMV has always had the PE chapter. Outside of Joint Commission, a different accrediting body, and actually, it pulls more leadership in to make sure that there's a lot more leadership involvement with just a blanket standard, 12 standards in the PE chapter, and there's a lot of stuff that fit in there. I know there's a fear out there that it gives a surveyor. Now we can point out, the standard says this, right? And it's very descriptive. It gives them a little bit more latitude to make their own conclusion on a finding or whatever. And if you think about it, I always say this, is the code books are like the Bible. it's up to the interpretation, right? It's the surveyor. And if I say surveyor dependent one time or 10 times on a survey, because each surveyor does have their own interpretation. So I don't see it really making more findings, especially if you are on top of it, right? So if you have a constant state of readiness or a readiness program within your hospital and you're doing what you should do, and you're educating staff and you're communicating with staff and so forth, it should not be an issue.
That was one of the points that Jim made during our conversation. He said, and it sounds like you agree with him, he's like, if your last survey, you had a good survey, and you're still continuing to do everything you did from the last survey to this one, then you're going to be okay.
Correct. Yes.
So there'll obviously be more on that to come. We'll see what happens, especially as we go into the new year. It'll be interesting, and we'll cover it here on Healthcare Facilities Network. We have two great guests for me to ask this question because, Steve, as you know, you've been involved in healthcare and architecture for 40 years, and you've been on the client side, you've been on the owner side, you've been on every side. Tom, same to you, same as you. What I want to ask you about, though, is, before we talk about the findings you find, is the critical relationship that needs to exist between FM, the facility side, and that clinical side, right? Especially as it relates to Joint Commission, DNV, findings across hospitals. Can you just explain, Tom, I'll go to you first, and Steve, feel free to jump in at any time. Can you explain how that relationship should work and how it does work and what your observations are about that, the relationship between clinical, FM, especially as it comes to these high pressure situations, right, where you're out there surveying?
Right. Well, again, I think there should always be great collaboration between clinical and in clinical. I'm talking about infection control. I'm talking about quality. I'm talking about nursing. I'm talking about, all the way down to EVS. There needs to be a collaborative approach to the house, right? And I see that very infrequently when I'm out on survey, right? You see collaboration infrequently? Infrequently, yes. Okay. Yes, kind of like pillars, right? So EVS does their own thing, and then when you have the conversations, it's like, I don't know, that's not my department. That's EVS or that's nursing, and I tell them 100 times and they don't listen. and really, what I do when I'm on survey, it's amazing because I ask for as many people as possible to go with me on survey because I love to educate. My team loves to educate, and one thing we do when people come with us, one thing we hear is, oh, I've never seen this part of the hospital, or didn't even know this existed, or what have you. But then, instead of just saying, hey, I'm taking your doorstop because you have your door propped open, we explain the why. And I think if more organizations actually explain why you can't do certain things and why you have to do certain things, it makes it a lot easier, and people want to be compliant, right? If they know there's a reason, and it's just not that, my door's propped open, or I left my wow in front of the med gas shutoffs or whatever, explain why. If there's an emergency, we need to be able to shut these utility systems off immediately, and and I'll digress, but one big thing we see is conflicting exit signage. So you'll have an exit sign above a door, and then underneath it, you'll have a do not enter sign that says surgical attire required beyond this point. Life safety, we say you can't do that. Clinical says we have to do it. We can't have someone coming in, so it's kind of those types of things. So then when you explain there's an emergency in the hospital and we have to evacuate horizontally quickly, and you've got general public out there, they're not going to go through a sign that says, surgical attire. They're not, even if there's a big exit sign above it. So you got to think of different verbiage to put up to not stop the public, right? Anyway, I'll digress from that. We'll get into some of that stuff later. But again, I just think it's the education piece. It's the communication and the explanation of the whys.
Why do you think, you just said the explanation of whys, this is a different why I'm going to ask, but why do you think that after all these years, right? And we hear about collaboration everywhere these days. We hear about risk, we hear about cost, we hear about all of the negative things that come out when you don't collaborate. Why do you think there's not a greater sense of collaboration? What's the root, well, not the root cause, but what are some of the causes of that, do you think? And Steve, after Tom goes, love to hear your opinion too, because you've led teams.
I think it starts with the foundation. You can collaborate all you want to, but with turnover, with new people coming in, exiting the organization, if you don't have a base, some type of a standardized process for collaboration, it's not going to happen, because it's not going to transfer from the population today to the population tomorrow. So I think you have to have a program of collaboration, right? It needs to be hardwired in the organization. Once it's hardwired in the organization, I remember 10 years ago when we first, we thought safety huddles were cutting edge. And now every hospital does safety huddles, and now they're even doing them virtual and so forth. But, but that got hardwired in the organization, and now it's just a norm.
So back to your first question to Tom. My perspective is generally a little bit before Tom's perspective during the planning and design phases for projects. And the same issues there, though. There's often the planning of capital projects is done in a silo that is not connected to the silo that facilities is in. If in many organizations, as Tom said, if you can hardwire that collaboration needs to occur throughout the process. Capital planning, initial capital planning, if you don't integrate the facilities needs with your clinical needs and your strategic improvements, you're gonna have trouble once the project gets up. You don't have an accurate idea of what you're going to need within that project in terms of maybe the air handlers are out, and you end up with the problems that once the facilities are up and operating, you end up with the problems that Tom is describing in the doorstop example. For example, if that happened to be a fire door, perhaps it's a fire door that you can put on a hold open that immediately closes. Sometimes, so you can address some of those issues in planning. The signs that are put up, you need to be looking at those signs during the planning phase. So you don't have to wait till Tom comes along and tells you, hey, that wording's not going to work. So I think that collaboration just extends throughout the process of a project, from the very initiation, the capital planning, through the design, and then into the final construction.
But we know that those silos still exist, right? And it's clear what you've just described is the way to do it. Tom, Steve was talking, I was thinking, think back to when you were actually when you were a hospital employee, working the day-to-day. How did you, and I don't know what your situation was relative to silos and communication, but how did you make sure that you got that seat at the table so that, say, Steve's your architect, you can talk about some of these issues right at the very front, so you're not scrambling at the end on a life safety review 2 weeks before the hospital opens? How did you make sure your voice was heard?
So I asked to be invited to departmental meetings on a regular basis, and we would pick a topic to review. And the topic that I felt had the most interest is when I described life safety drawings and put them up on the board and explained why we have them, what they're there for. And when you say it's to protect this corridor right here, so you can get from here to here, they all get it. And I say, if you've got this door propped open and the fire's in that room, you're now blocking the egress path. You're not going to be able to get out safely through that exit. And when you just put it in the terms that they understand, and not that they're very smart people, a lot smarter than I, but when you actually just put it in layman's terms, they get it. It's like all of a sudden it clicks. And so the other thing I also did is I invited line staff to my environment of care safety committee meetings. So we actually had line staff sitting on those committees because they're the ones that are frontline. They're seeing it, they're bringing it, they're seeing the trends, and that seemed to work well. In addition, so again, it's collaboration, it's involvement, and it's communication.
So it seems like a big part of the mode you operate, both now as a consultant and when you were in the hospital, is you're going back to the foundation. You said it. What's the why? And once you get that why out there, then everything can flow from that.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Simple, but not always done.
Right. Correct.
So let's transition. But before we transition, Steve, any final thoughts on the collaboration, that relationship between clinical, let's break it down, explain the why, and it'll be better. But any final thoughts before we move on to these top 10?
Just the final thought that it really extends to when you're planning a project, it really extends all of it to facilities, maintenance, it extends to EVS, it extends to infection control. All of those departments need to be included in the planning process, or you'll miss something. And when you open up, you'll have something that is not functioning correctly, something that is not going to be able to be licensed. So you really have to have all of those folks participating in the process. And you would think that that's a lesson that everybody learns, but quite frankly, even as early as the latest 3 months ago, I was brought into a project where the doctors and the business people felt they knew how to design a primary care practice, right? And fortunately, it was still only on paper and not built, but there was totally inadequate EVS space. There was totally inadequate IT space. IT is another critical department to make sure that you include in the planning. So.
We could probably do a whole show. Maybe we should at some point, like horror stories from this. But as you're talking there, Steve, I'm just thinking to myself, like, everybody wants to go faster and faster to get to market, and that's working against us many times these days, right? Yeah. So speed to market, but you miss the fundamentals, right? If you're so fast, you're going to miss the foundation, like you say there, Tom.
Yep.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. It's why I like talking about it rather than doing it. It's a lot easier. So let's transition, Tom, to you to start.
Yes.
You're out there, mock surveys, you get the joint, got to say joint commission because the is gone. People are still saying JACO, and now they think that people are going to drop the from the joint commission. But what are the top findings, Tom, that you are finding out there as you and your team visit hospitals?
Well, I mean, when we go through and we probably do 6 to 8 surveys a month, top-down surveys, which include also document review. Our average amount of findings, just when you said top 10, that's, there's we could be here for hours, right? Well, so I'm glad you said top 10, because we typically find in a 750,000 square foot hospital, we'll find 500 findings. So for the top 10, I mean, it pretty much does mirror what Joint Commission has came out with their top 10 or 16 or whatever that they have. But it's and I'll go down and I'll explain kind of it's the same stuff. It's over and over again, right? It's the same stuff. We're seeing issues with fire drills. Okay, so fire drills, you're required to do 1 per shift per quarter. They can't be patterned. We see a lot of patterns, to where, security's doing the fire drills, plan ops doesn't do them anymore. And security, Bob, who works 7 to 3, he likes to do them all. So they do 1 at 7 for first shift, 3 for second shift. He'll come in at 6:45 to catch that third shift. And now we've got a pattern, right? And then additionally, we're really seeing a lot of this is the OR fire drills. So the OR fire drills are separate from that one per shift per quarter. And once a year, you have to at least simulate an exit drill. And so we don't see that all the time. And then with that drill, there should be a critique and an after action created, for improvements that are needed and so forth. And then that needs to be filed with your fire drills. In addition to that, you need to also provide education on the OR safety risks within the OR at least annually as well. We do that. We have a whole program for it. We even do the critique for you. But so that's the number one is the fire drill piece that we see.
So Tom, you simulate an OR fire drill. Is that literally evacuating? What does it mean to simulate an OR fire drill?
So it's basically like a tabletop, right? You go into the OR, you can have someone act as the patient or not, and you get your role through the education. What does the surgeon do? What does the anesthesiologist do? So through the education, all those roles are kind of predefined on if you have that position, this is kind of what you do. And you have someone not involved in the drill at all critique it, right, based on what they're supposed to do. We have a critique form, and I'm sure many hospitals do as well. And you just critique and say, okay, they didn't shut off the med gases, or they brought in an ABC fire extinguisher and they shouldn't have. They should have used the carbon dioxide. All of those types of things, and you critique it. And then, if it's bad enough, we always recommend doing it again, re-educating, next month, do it again until you get, to where, again, it's hardwired within the OR staff. But then the physician and the anesthesia involvement is key. That is one thing Joint Commission looks for. If you're taking attendance, make sure they put MD after it or CRNA or whatever, just to make sure that you do have that involvement.
If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the network. And more importantly, share it with your colleagues in the healthcare industry. Together, we can solve the aging crisis that's impacting all of us.
You've talked about a lot, what's the why behind it. And when I was doing recruiting prior to joining CREF, like when an organization, let's say that they were seeking a director, and they wanted a degreed person. And sometimes I would say, well, why do you want the degree? What do you need it for? And sometimes they would the answer was because that's how we do it, which to me wasn't really an answer, because that's how we do it. When you ask, like fire drills, fundamental, we see these horror stories when hospitals catch on fire, what can happen? Fire drills seem like a pretty important thing. Do you ever ask why, why don't you do it? And when you do ask those questions, what do you hear back?
So especially for the OR fire drills, because we actually put them on and we try to schedule them. And trying to schedule anything, as you guys I'm sure know, in an OR, especially if it's a busy hospital, it's almost impossible. Yeah. It is almost impossible. So that is not something that's on their mind. It's not on their priority list. They're thinking the safety officers got that, or security's got that. Mm-hmm. I don't have to worry about it. And that's kind of, why I think that it just kind of falls off, right? Because they're churning through, case after case after case after case. Last thing they want to do is stop or have to come in earlier than 6 o'clock in the morning to simulate a fire drill, or there's always cases being added on at the end. So everyone's sitting around waiting to do the fire drill. So it's just really, really, really hard to get something like that scheduled.
And that goes back to your early on point about hardwiring it into the process. If OR people think the safety guys got it, or the safety people have it, and they don't, you create that process, and that, right. Then you have it.
Yep.
Okay, so fire drills, number one. What do we got after that?
Blocked safety shut-offs equipment, pull stations, blocked electrical panels, clutter in hallways. That's a big one. They went to the WOWs now, and they said, WOWs can be in the corridors as long as they're working. Well, now they're putting stationary chairs in front of their WOWs. So now it's become a desk, and it's in the middle of the hall or in the middle of the corridor. And again, what I think is funny is like some people have actually put tape on the floor, or which tape's a bad thing, but some type of marking on the floor saying do not block. And I've got so many pictures, do not block, and you've got the wow right there in front of it, or what have you. And again, the why is, if there's a fire, I've got to get to that med gas shutoff as soon as possible after collaborating with respiratory therapy and whoever else you deem. But we need to be able to get to that. And if we can't be pushing stuff out of the way, we've got a lot of stuff in the hallways, we can't get the beds out if we have to do a horizontal evacuation into the next smoke compartment, right? And the corridors are 8 feet for a reason. So you can get two beds down at one time, side by side. That's why they're 8 feet. So again, once they know the why, then they get it, right? And then you explain, when you put a chair here in front of your wow, I know you're tired, but now it becomes a desk, because you don't only have to move your wow, you've got to move the chair. So and again, we see these, that's why they're not necessarily the top from a risk perspective, but they're the top for a number of findings that we see.
I wonder if it goes back to just, you're so busy, you're not necessarily thinking. I mean, I don't, what do you think causes it? It's
inconvenient. If they're far away from, a patient's room, they have to walk, they're on their feet all day long, right? So, yeah. And a lot of times, like Steve said, there's not enough places in a hospital to put the stuff. I mean, yeah. I think it's amazing that they find places to put it during survey, but but they can't during normal operations, right? So, right. It's again, that's in the design, there should be alcoves and so on, but cost per square foot to build a hospital, you don't want storage space, right? Because that's very expensive space. I think that's the why is well, where else do you want me to put it? Yeah. I go into an OR and they've got the limb panels, the line isolation monitor panels blocked, but you look around, there's no place to put the stuff.
Steve, what is your design mind, as you're listening to Tom talk about that? Where does your design mind go?
Sure. Well, specifically to the issue of wows in the corridors, that is very difficult in hospitals that were designed and built, say, more than 5 to 8 years ago. Mostly now, what you're saying, a lot of is providing alcoves, and really thorough design process is going to include, really looking at how these facilities operate, the number of equipment alcoves, that you need in a surgery suite is incredible. Plus, some good solid amount of storage. In a nursing unit, you need to have, particularly if the nurses are using wows, you need to have those areas near the patient. There was a trend probably about 6 or 8 years ago to provide small mini remote nurse stations, which a lot of nurses initially tended not to like, because they liked the having the camaraderie of being at the nurse station with other nurses and centralizing. Now, with the emphasis on, and with the use of wows, and with the emphasis on speed of care, or individual care, you're getting more. You don't want to build in those nurse stations. You want to build in areas where the nurse can use the computer and type in her reports. So those kinds of things have to be incorporated into the design process when you're either renovating a space or designing a new space.
The level of nuance, right, and sophistication, and just getting it down to these minute details is so critical, especially as you guys were saying, nobody wants to pay for space for storage, right? But the level which your mind needs to go, you got to think everything through, because everything has that impact. And Tom, you're right. Last couple of weeks, we've been traveling quite a bit, hit a number of different regional conferences, and you're exactly right. One of the presentations we went to was on the Joint Commission, and the presenter was saying that listen, when the Joint Commission's here, roll it out, roll the equipment out of the hallway. But as soon as they leave, it's going right back, and said from the podium, because everybody's struggling with that, right? It's not unique. So we got fire drills, we got clutter, wows, hallways. What else you're finding out there?
A big one, and a big one for me, is air pressure, temperature, humidity, right? For not only your primary rooms, but your secondary rooms. Primary rooms being your ORs and your SPD and those types of things. Secondary rooms being clean utility, soil utility. If Joint Commission comes and you're out of range on especially pressures, right? If you're supposed to be positive and you're negative, they're giving you until they leave to fix it. But if they can't fix it, it's an automatic condition level, right? So these are high risk, high findings. The newer hospitals are better, of course, as Steve said. The older hospitals is where we struggle, because things in the hospitals, they remodel, they change things, they add more equipment, they've turned an office into a clean room, they've turned a soiled room into an office. All this stuff happens throughout time. So you're required to make sure that you're monitoring it. So a lot of times, I'll ask the question, how do you know that the room is okay to perform an operation? We'll just use ORs for instance. And they say, well, we know facilities monitors it, and if they don't call us, we know it's fine. Well, you can't do that. You've got to have someone, looking at it real time, saying, okay, we're 0.01 inches of water column negative or positive, we're good to go. Let's go, and or at least do a tissue test, right? If you don't have the manometers and those types of things, at least do a tissue test. If the temperature, but so that's just on the pressure piece, right? So you just need to have, again, some type of system in place that you're looking at it to make sure that it's okay. You're not performing an operation in a negative room, right? Or whatever. Temperature and humidity, that changes throughout the day. I mean, it changes based on building load, the wind outside, the number of cases you have, how many times this door opens, that door opens, everything changes. But and especially a lot of the surgeons like the temperature in the ORs to be very cold. And it's okay. There's a footnote in the code that says in FGI guidelines that said it's okay, but document it, right? And monitor your humidity, because if your temperature goes down, your humidity goes up, right? So you have to make sure that you're monitoring that as well. And a lot of times we don't see that happen. They'll have the OR set at 60 degrees and the humidity is at 72%. And again, high humidity, things grow. Low humidity, things burn, right? So it really is just setting a program to where you're monitoring it. You've got facilities who's monitoring on a global basis, but you need someone also to be monitoring and documenting if they're out of range, what did they do about it, and close that loop saying, in their documentation saying, call facilities, rechecked it at 8 o'clock, everything was fine. Type thing. So,
I would add air change rates to that list as well. Particularly, I think, and this goes back partially, Peter, to the aging infrastructure issue that we're seeing throughout older hospitals. But also, the other piece to this is, as Tom was mentioning, the changes in use, and this where I particularly see this is in things like cath labs, where now, or interventional radiology, where any of these procedures, which initially a cath lab suite is designed for regular caths, and now all of a sudden you're performing much more complex procedures, and TAVRs is one example, and all of a sudden you need to start having more of an OR environment, higher air changes, directed airflow over the patient, tighter humidity and temperature controls than what you did when you were not doing what used to be called an invasive procedure. So I think that's another issue that I see a lot in as we're going into and trying to remodel, replace equipment, any of those kinds of things. Suddenly, the types of procedures that are happening are much more complex and require much more rigid controls than the space was initially designed for.
So, it's an interesting point you guys bring up with this big, air pressure, temperature, humidity, changes to use. You guys are much more technical, much more intelligent than me when it comes to that. My mind goes to, and I'd like to hear what you guys think. My mind goes to, Steve, you talked about the aging infrastructures, which we know is a huge issue. We talk about it a lot here on the network. We also talk about aging employees and or the lack of employees coming in. And so, this is one that concerns me from the employee perspective, especially like changes of use. We see it, Tom. I'm sure you go out there and you're dealing with folks who maybe don't have a lot of healthcare experience. When you change the occupancy of the room, if you've lost the institutional knowledge for somebody to come there and say, hey, these are the implications of changing the occupancy, all the way down to how you guys just described it, I fear that we're losing some of that, and we're not bringing in knowledgeable people. And sure, people could say, okay, we can automate things. We can put it on technology. But you guys know, everybody changes the automation. Everybody changes the technology. Does anybody catch the change? So I'm kind of, talk a little bit, if you will, about the brain power that we're losing and the impacts it has. Because like you said, ORs, there's a lot of money there. Air pressure, the risk is very high there. And to me, somewhat scary.
Yes. And you're right. When we bring new people into the organization, they're still very intelligent, they're very smart.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
They don't necessarily have that institutional or that regulatory and compliance mindset, right? If they were managing an office building or even a factory or whatever, there's different standards, but it's not the healthcare standard. It's not caring for patients, caring for potentials for fire and all of that stuff that you don't really have to worry about that much in other industries. And we are seeing that, and we're seeing that institutional knowledge go. And we've been talking about it for 10 years, probably, that, that the healthcare knowledge base is retiring, there's no backfill. CREF, we've noticed that we actually have, a whole curriculum on, you can hire someone, with good technical skills, and we'll give them that regulatory, acumen, and then follow up with them and just kind of mentor them. And it's a program that we offer. But what organizations, I feel, should be doing, and we've been saying it for 10 years, and I'll just say it again here, is succession planning.
Yeah.
You should be succession planning. Even if someone's, 50 years old, just have a succession plan. One, people nowadays don't stay like they used to, so there should always be some type of bench, as I call it. And that takes work. It does take an investment, right? Because you got to spend more time and teach someone. But that's the best way to deal with it from an organizational standpoint. But then if you have someone leave, then you need to probably have someone, come in if you can't find something. I mean, we have hospitals we work for, they haven't had a director in, 2 years. They just can't find one because of geography or it doesn't fit the job description because they don't have the bachelor's degree or the master's degree, but yet they could have had years and years of experience, but sometimes that plays into it. Again, I think that's the best way to do it is really start looking at your team and hire in, a supervisor or a working supervisor that you can mentor and come up, get them involved with your safety committee, get them involved with infection control, get them involved with all these people, and just kind of do cross training and succession planning.
You brought up a really good point, Tom, and I saw this at the end as I was just doing straight recruiting for Gosselin Martin, and I still see it here at CREF. We have, and when I say we, I guess as an industry, in cutting positions, like, you know this, right? When you start, like, supervisors and managers used to be kind of that farm system for a hospital, right?
Right.
Director leaves, you kind of have people moving up that ladder. So many organizations have wiped out supervisors, definitely. Managers are still there, but we've almost eliminated that farm system that fed our future leadership. So what's another one, Tom? We've got fire drills. We've talked about hallway space clutter wows. We got air pressure, temperature, humidity. What do we got next?
Okay, I'll give you one, and it'll have a couple with it. Some I've talked about, some I haven't. But then I want to give you, because we just saw this a few weeks ago. Stained ceiling tiles. I know that sounds, you see them everywhere, and you have to understand, I'm going to say stained ceiling tiles, cracked ceiling tiles, voids in your ceiling tiles, what have you. A stained ceiling tile, if it looks bad underneath, imagine what it looks like on top, right? So it's a lot worse on top. So that's an infection control issue, not really life safety, but we try to look at everything.
You can't turn your brain off.
Right. And plus that ceiling, if it's unseated or whatever, it's avoiding your smoke barrier, because we use those suspended ceilings as our smoke barrier throughout our hospitals. Most of them do. As an example, we were touring a hospital in a NICU, a very busy NICU, and we came up to the soiled room. I took my manometer to check the soiled room, and the soiled room was more positive than a OR. I mean, it was extremely positive. I open the doors, I always do, to check everything, and I look up, and there is a ceiling tile in there that had lots and lots and lots and lots of growth. Don't know. We can't say what we think it is because we didn't test it, but I know what it was. You know what it was. So not only in the NICU did we have a positive room, but we had a contaminant in that room that was obvious, that was positive to the NICU core. A lot of times people don't put two and two together, but that made that a very high level finding immediately, right? Because it's blowing it out, and you've got those spores and all that other stuff in that room that could. So that's my next one. I think near and dear to my heart, which a lot of people don't think about, is in the kitchens. I love kitchens, by the way. I always go in the kitchen, and they hate to see me come, but
wait, why do you love kitchens? What is it about the kitchen that attracts you?
A long time ago, I used to be in hospitality, and so they really want to know, because they're not out in the house, right? So you can go in there and really explain it to them and explain the why to them. And there's two things in kitchens that I always find. One, natural gas, if they are your fryers or your grills or whatever are on wheels and powered by natural gas, they have to be tethered to the wall. So you can't pull them out and overextend that gas line, because if that happens, what happens? And that's a very high level finding if it happens. And we find it probably 95% of the time they are not tethered. So you can just move all around.
Wow.
And then the other big thing in kitchens, believe it or not, is the can opener. I know it sounds trivial, but if they have the industrial can openers that fit down into the little shaft and for the big cans, and if you pull that out and look at the blade, it is caked with stick. And so what I do is I'll take it up to the chef, or I'll take it up to someone. I'll say, Here, do you want to try this? And he's like, no, that's gross. I'm like, well, you're putting it in my food. Ooh. When you open the can. So those are just two of my and my team just hates it when I go into kitchens, just because I do spend a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time educating, but and the kitchens don't get a lot of support either, so.
Yeah. Well, so you're a facilities guy at heart, a hospitality guy too, we just learned. We can't end on a kitchen. Give us one more.
Okay. How about handling of medical gases?
There you go.
So medical gases, we're always finding e-cylinders, just sitting in a corridor, sitting in a storeroom, not in a rack. But more than that with them, we often find them commingled. A lot of times we'll go into a facility shop, and people don't really think about this a lot, but they're not using their torches every day, and that's acetylene and that's oxygen. So that's sitting over on a shelf. Well, what do you have? You've got an oxidizing gas that can catch on fire because it's in storage and they're together. They always are in a torch kit. So we always try to educate that when it's not in use, they need to be separate, and not stored together. The co-mingling of gases, the more than 12 e-cylinders in a smoke compartment, full or empty, they can't be more than 12. We're always finding more than that. The sheer amount in some storage rooms that aren't built for anything over 300 cubic feet. So that's really, we see a lot of that, especially when we go into like areas of respiratory therapy where they might have their emergency management supplies or emergency prep supplies and everything, and they'll have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of e-tanks in there, and the exhaust isn't right, the electrical isn't right in there, no door closer, those types of things. So really managing, and we were just at a hospital, and they said, you're not going to find one e-tank, and that was this week. We're not going to find one e-tank because we did a whole hospital sweep. We found 6 that were unsecured.
So, Tom, this is the last question, and this is Tom Grice, VP of Regulatory and Facilities for CREF, and Steve Van Ness, VP of Design and Construction for CREF. This may be one that you've already mentioned, Tom, or maybe you didn't get to. What is the biggest head scratcher to you that you most commonly find?
Mine is walking into active construction. I'm not talking construction, and I'll explain. And not seeing an ICRA, infection control risk assessment, done, or an ILSM. And I don't understand, because when we do document review, we see some of it, but it's never, I shouldn't say never, it's rarely complete to their policy, right? Walking down the hall a couple weeks ago, people think that sometimes, I think people think that ICRAs and ILSMs are for construction only. They're not thinking about general maintenance, everyday maintenance. And walking down a corridor, on a patient floor, and they had a painter with a sander sanding the door frames, no containment, no nothing, no ICRA, no one knew it was happening. So, and that happens because when you think construction, when you think ICRAs and PICRAs and ILSMs, you're thinking about construction. But you generate dust, and you have life safety systems that are impaired all the time. And I don't understand why you've got the policy, you do it for construction, but you just don't do it for general maintenance.
I would add that sometimes in construction projects you have areas where, we're just going to do cosmetics in that area, right? And so we don't really need to make sure we have our ICRA and our ILSM in place. Not true. Not true.
Yeah.
All of those issues that Tom sees that are related to regular maintenance happen when folks are trying to speed things up, trying to take shortcuts to get a facility open on time, or just trying to save some cost and some administrative time. Same things. It's not just regular maintenance where we see that occur. We see that occur in construction projects as well. Now
that is one to end on, not the kitchen. Despite, Tom, your love of the kitchen, not the ICRA and the ILSM. That's for the audience. So, Tom Grice, Steve Van Ness, thank you for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
If you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Healthcare Facilities Network, go to healthcarefacilitiesnetwork.com and let us know who you are and what you want to talk about, because together we can solve this critical aging issue.